This is Jess Leahy coming to you with episode 5 of the Gift of Failure Facts. Today's question is one I get often. It actually came to me this weekend from a relative of mine and reminded me that I hadn't gotten to this one yet. I think because it scares me a little bit. This question is a hard one for me. So here's the question. Jess, I am so ready to give my kid more autonomy and help him feel more competent and show him just how connected I am to him and how much faith I have in his competence. But he has special needs. He has, whatever the special need is. He has special learning issues. He has his executive function is really lacking. He has ADHD. He has dyslexia. He has Asperger's, whatever it is. And I'm just afraid that if everything is going to fall apart if I back off, that he just isn't capable of what some of his peers are capable of. Awesome question. Let's start from the fact that I am not an expert in kids with special needs. I have taught for 20 years. I have taught plenty of kids with all kinds of special needs within a regular school setting. I currently teach kids who are at risk for addiction because they have ADHD, dyslexia, whatever it is. One of the things we know about addiction is that if you don't treat early learning issues quickly, if you don't address the reason that kids are failing in school early, you set kids up to be more likely to become addicted later in life. So that's where I am. I teach drug and alcohol addicted kids, so I tend to have a lot of kids with special needs. So given that, there actually was a chapter in The Gift of Failure in one of the early drafts on how do we apply this to kids with special needs. And frankly, just because special needs is such a big category and kids are so different and there's such a huge spectrum of what kids need, the chapter just started to take over the whole book. And my editor and I decided that it just was best to cut that chapter. Okay. All right. So given all of that, I actually wrote an article a couple of years ago about when kids, the title was something like When Kids Say I Can't and Adults Know They Can. And it was about what I at the time termed feigned helplessness, which I was very quickly remedied when a bunch of therapists that I talked to about the article said, Jess, it's not feigned helplessness, that's learned helplessness. And guess who teaches it to them? One of the experts I talked to in that article is a woman I adore. Her name is Katie Hurley. She has written a bunch of books. One of my favorites is, she's written a book called The Happy Kid Handbook, and she has a book coming out called No More Mean Girls, which is fantastic. She happens to, in her practice, deal with a lot of kids who are newly diagnosed with learning disabilities. And one of the things that she told me is that our knee-jerk reaction as parents is to protect our kids. Of course, our knee-jerk reaction is to protect our kids from the label, from the anxiety around the label, from our own anxiety around our kids suddenly having a label. And we tend to want to do more for them because we don't want them to get frustrated. We don't want them to feel like they're in over their heads. We don't want them to feel less than. We don't ever want our kids to feel less than someone else who can do this thing and yet our kid can't do it. But Katie points out how problematic that knee-jerk response is, because the more we do for our kids, the more we teach them that we don't think they're capable of doing it themselves, and the more we put off helping them feel competent about the very skills that they have anxiety about. So it's going to be really important to make sure that we're not overcompensating for kids who have special needs. The way I put it is this, and I put it this way with kids who are neurotypical as well, which is, let's pretend as parents that there's a line, an imagined line on the ground where we think our kids' ability level lies. Let's just stick our toe over that line and assume our kids can do a little bit more than we as parents assume they can do. Everyone knows their kid best, so take wherever that individual line is according to our specific kid and just put your toe over it and assume a little bit more. There's a study that circulates every once in a while about two groups of perfectly average children. And if you know anything about me, you know I use the words perfectly average on purpose. two groups of perfectly average children. And you hand those two groups to a teacher. But you tell the teacher, you prime the teacher by saying, one of these groups is perfectly average, go at it. One of these groups, though, is really gifted and talented. This group over here, so gifted and talented. So just plan your lessons accordingly. Of course, both groups still perfectly average. We're faking out for the teacher. We're lying to the teacher, essentially. And then we watch what happens, and it turns out that the teacher responds differently to those two groups and expects more of the gifted and talented group, the group that she believes is gifted and talented. And guess what? Those kids perform at a higher level than their perfectly average peers who the teacher believes to be perfectly average. So there's something to be said about expecting more for our children because they will perform better for us, okay? So back to the question. We know our kids best. Let's expect just a tiny bit more from them wherever they are. One of the things you have to understand is that teachers have to meet every one of their students where they are, which means when I go into my classroom and I'm teaching high school kids who might have a reading level from grade 5 all the way to, college level, I can't just expect more of all of them and expect them all to raise to college level. No, I have to go to each of those kids and expect just a little bit more from them than their appropriate level assumes. So I'm going to each kid expecting a little bit more of them. So I told all of this to my relative who has a child with Asperger's, and she has admitted that she's maybe been doing a little bit more for her kid or a little bit too much for her kid. And so how can she turn that around? And again, talking to your kid and modeling for your kid that you've been doing a little bit too much for them. And I'm really sorry about that because I think I've lost out on some opportunities for you to show me just how competent you can be. Now, that works great. Starting there, but let me tell you about a little study. So a couple of years ago, I was lucky enough to be sitting across from the amazing, fantabulous, brilliant, incredible Angela Duckworth, who is the mother of sort of the grit movement. Watch her TED Talk. She's fantastic. Her book, Grit, is great. I was sitting across from Angela, and we were talking about learned helplessness. And she said, let me explain it to you this way. And she gave me a simplified version of the experiment. And that's the way I'm going to present it to you today. Learned helplessness looks a little bit like this. All right. Picture two cages. In both of these cages is a baby rat. In each of the cages, the rat gets shocked. And I always have to apologize to high school or to kids when I explain this to them because they're always sad for the rat, and that just derails the whole discussion. Both of these rats are being shocked, and it's a little bit painful. Now, one of the rats, this rat, has the ability to turn off the shocks whenever he wants. And so he can turn a little rat wheel and turn off the shocks. And it turns the shocks off for both rats. But this rat over here doesn't have the ability to turn off the shocks. Gets the same amount of shocks as this rat, and this rat is over here is turning off the shocks, but this rat has no control over the pain. Now, take these two rats and let them grow up. Let them grow up to be adolescent rats. Put them both on an electrified plate, meaning that they're not tied to this thing. They can jump off whenever they want. Shock them through the electrical plate. It hurts, so they want to get off, right? The rat over here, who's always had the control to turn off the shocks, will jump off the electrical plate and escape the pain. This rat over here, who's been shocked the same amount as rat 1, will sit there and just stay and endure the pain. Now, this is analogous to what happens to kids. When we do everything for kids, when we take control away from kids, when we're overly directive with kids and we just say, oh, you've run into frustration, here, let me do that for you, or let me show you, let me turn it off for you, or let me do whatever it is. Doing everything for kids turns kids helpless. It makes them learn to be helpless. So whether your kid has special needs or whether your kid is a neurotypically perfectly average kid or whether your kid is a brilliant genius, all of these kids can learn to be helpless. In fact, all of them do. I meet these kids all the time. These are kids who, whether it makes life more convenient for them, because frankly, for some kids, they know that if they just say, I don't know how to do that, who knows how to load a dishwasher? I have no idea. For those kids, they just know that we'll throw up our hands and we'll say, okay, fine, I'll just do it for you. But some kids really do believe they don't know and really do believe they can't do it. And it's up to us to help them unlearn that helplessness, whether that's by saying, I have faith in you. I think you'll figure it out by yourself, and letting them just go at it and figure out how to load a dishwasher themselves. Or you say, look, oh, you know what? My bad. I never taught you how to do that. Let me just show you really quickly how to do it. No. I'm not going to do it for you. I'm going to show you how to do it. And then the next time you can do it on your own without me. Unlearning helplessness is a huge role for parents, especially parents that have been teaching their kids to be helpless along the way. I don't want my children to be that rat who's going to feel discomfort and not feel like they have the ability to escape that discomfort, whether that's a discomfort of doing some sort of job they don't want to do, or because someone's treating them badly. I want my kids to feel like I have the power to end this myself. This is also tied to something called self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is the belief that the actions that we take will have impact on our immediate reality. And not only that, it'll have impact on the world around us. I've talked about this when I'm talking about connection and making learning relevant for kids. Self-efficacy is really important for kids to learn because it means that they know that if I change this in my world, it will actually affect my future. And that's what feeds hope. Hope, according to one of my favorite people on the planet, who's unfortunately no longer with us, Shane Lopez, who was at Hope Monger on Twitter, because that's what he was. He was a seller. A monger is a seller. He was a seller of hope. He was a distributor of hope. He was a believer in hope. And one of the things he talked about with hope is that hope is not only just the belief that the world will be different, but also the belief that you, our kids, have the ability to make that hope happen for us. That's and change the world and change our lives. That's what hope is all about. So kids who don't feel helpless, who haven't learned helplessness, kids who believe they have the self-efficacy, they have the ability to take things in their life they don't like, I have a cold, my head is all stuffy, to take the things in their life that they don't enjoy and change them and make their lives different. Kids who believe that they can change the world. Kids who have hope, and not just hope, but hope plus the belief that they can make that hope happen. That's what we want for kids, whether those kids are neurotypical, whether those kids have special needs. So, to sum up, go where your kid is. Meet your kid where they are. And that goes for teachers and that goes for parents. Meet your kids where they are. And then just set the expectations a little bit higher. If it helps, the whole middle chapter of The Gift of Failure, it's about middle school, but it's not, it is, but it's also about executive function. It's an entire chapter on breaking down all the different parts of executive function. And because kids, when we say kids have executive function deficits, we don't mean they don't do all of it. We mean that they get certain parts of it at any given time. They can't handle that. So the whole middle school chapter breaks down executive function into all of its component parts and gives parents advice about how to help shore up executive function and be their training wheels in kids who need help. This often happens in middle school, ergo the chapter happens to be about middle school. But it's not really. It's about helping kids, meeting them where they are, being their training wheels for them so that they don't automatically sink into this feeling of helplessness, and giving them control. The nice thing, the recent research on the same day I was sitting, sorry to be so scattered, but the same day that I was sitting across the table from Angela Duckworth, I was also sitting across the table from Martin Seligman, and this was a pretty great day, I have to admit. And Marty Seligman told me something really interesting. He said, when we look at learned helplessness, it turns out that our default circuit in our brain, when confronted with prolonged discomfort, prolonged lack of control, prolonged feelings of helplessness, that our default, the way we handle that is to curl up in a ball and make it want to go away. Our default way we handle that is to go helpless. And the way we short circuit that is with control. Giving kids autonomy and control is the short circuit to learned helplessness. We want our kids to be we want our kids to be less helpless. We want our kids to be more competent. The way to make that happen is with more control, more autonomy. So with that, because really I can't say it any better than Martin Seligman says it, so I'm going to sign off. You can always find me at Jess Leahy on Twitter. You can find me at Teacher Leahy on Instagram. You can go to jessicaleahy.com and all of the videos are there. You can subscribe to my YouTube channel. Again, thank you to Grown and Flown and Lisa Heffernan, who has been posting these videos over there, and Mary Dell Harrington, because Grown and Flown is where I seem to be getting the most views, and I am totally indebted. If you want to watch any of the earlier episodes, there's a playlist at my YouTube channel. Just Google Jessica Leahy and YouTube, and you can watch all the videos. See you next week for episode 6, and thank you so much.